Brilliant, thank you. Okay, well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whether you're in Latin America, the Middle East, or India. Welcome to this event on the traffic light guidelines for acknowledging pharmaceutical funding. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see all of you here with us today. My name is Victoria Gilbert. I'm the Head of Communications and Campaigns at the MS International Federation. And joining me from MSIF today are some of my colleagues who I think you may already know, but we'll go around and just say hello and do introductions. So Paulina, if we start with you.
Hello there, everybody. My name is Paulina Arce Casillas. I'm the Capacity Building Manager for the Latin American region.
Great, thank you, Paulina. And Duna.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Donna. I'm the Capacity Building Officer at MSIF.
Brilliant. And Zoe?
Hi, my name is Zoe and I'm Head of Capacity Building at MSIF.
Great. And Luke?
Hello, everybody. My name's Luke, and I'm the Director of Fundraising and Engagement at MSIF.
Brilliant. Okay. So let's get straight into the traffic light guidelines for acknowledging pharmaceutical funding. You should be able to see on your screen right now some very colourful front covers for the guidelines in Arabic, Spanish, and English. So these guidelines are really designed to help you in your MS organizations decide how best to acknowledge funding from pharmaceutical companies. The more confident that you feel in this area, the better you'll be able to negotiate with your funders and get the result that you want. And ultimately, that's important because it allows you to keep your independence, your editorial control, and therefore your reputation. And it's vital that MS communities see MS organizations as credible and trustworthy sources. So in this session today, we will hear from Paulina and Duna, who will tell us a bit more about the rationale behind creating the guidelines and why they're needed. And then Luke and I will go into some of the context and the detail on the 3 different scenarios in the guidelines, and we'll give you a few examples as well. And we hope that these examples will help you apply the guidelines to your own context and think through how they might work in practice. We'll then open the floor to questions, to comments, and reflections at the end. And actually, just before we move on, I want to take a moment to say a really big thank you to Emma in Argentina and Emor in Uruguay for supporting with the Spanish version of the guide. We really appreciate all of your support with the translation. Okay, so before I hand over to Paulina and Duna, just quickly give you an overview of the kinds of materials that these guidelines apply to. So it could be funding that you've received for information resources. It might be a digital resource or a printed booklet. It could be for your websites. It might be for materials promoting events, whether that's a live stream digital event, a webinar, an in-person event, or it could be for a video, for example. So these are just a few examples, but this list is by no means exhaustive. Okay, so I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to Paulina, who will speak in Spanish, and then we'll turn to Duna, who will be speaking in Arabic.
Gracias.
Thank you, Victoria. Again, welcome to you all to this webinar. As Victoria just said, these guidelines or list of guidelines came from the need to have a backup document allowing us organizations to make decisions about how to acknowledge our donors from pharmaceutical companies in a framework of transparency and legality, but at the same time not compromising our voice, the voice of organizations, and to have a clear framework where their relationship with those companies is always considered from a collaborative point of view. We also know that context where we operate, the different organizations operate, are very diverse. For instance, legislation on marketing and sponsoring is different from country to country, and sometimes we do not have a clear answer, a clear picture. There is a whole bunch of varieties and options. However, even the circumstances are diverse, they need to be very clear in the limits, and we also need that our communication with donors must be very clear from the onset. And this might be a very stressful moment for you who manage organizations. So we hope that with these guidelines, organizations and each of you will find helpful tips to make decisions with confidence and trust, and find a reliable tool to allow you to be consistent in your relationship with each and all of the companies from which you receive funds. In the capacity building team, we receive many questions and doubts from all over the planet, and that shows the need for a single useful tool for all of us to help us find the good questions and find the good answers.
And we will now move to Duna, who will be speaking in Arabic.
شكرا فيكتوريا. مرحبا جميعا.
Thank you, Victoria. I welcome you all. I'm very happy to be among you within this workshop, because we're discussing a salient topic for the MS patients. Those guidelines, this is a supporting document allowing MS organizations to have a mechanism for decision making regarding the donor nations provided by pharmaceutical companies based on transparency, also preserving the transparency of the organizations and the cooperation between them and the pharmaceutical companies. Those guidelines are very important because they determine the nature of the relationship between the organization and the pharmaceutical company, and also preserve the public trust. You all know that COVID-19, many virtual events were conducted online, and this matter requested more guidelines because the mottos of pharmaceutical companies appeared everywhere, and this might have a negative impact on the interest of the MS patients. Therefore, we do need those guidelines to help us decide and to know the way we can thank those pharmaceutical companies. Also, these guidelines will possibly uh, uh, assess to the relationship between pharmaceutical companies and MS organizations to have a cooperative relationship, and also would help them determine the decisions. This is a reliable tool regarding the way we thank those pharmaceutical companies to have a cooperative relationship, safeguarding the relationship between the MS organizations and the pharmaceutical companies.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Duna. That was really useful from both Paulina and Duna to have some of that context from the capacity building team at MSIF. So we're now going to hear from Luke, who's going to give us a little bit more context on the guidelines, particularly thinking about the relationships with pharmaceutical companies.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Victoria. So I absolutely echo what all of my colleagues have said so far about these guidelines and how useful they are. They're a very practical tool. They are first and foremost a way to set up rules, which is a really important part of a healthy relationship with pharmaceutical companies. We use these same rules ourselves at MSIF. And one of the key things that we find is important is to be consistent. When you change the rules about what you will and won't do from one relationship to the next or one day to the next, it becomes harder each time to say no to something or to try and impose a set of rules. So this document gives you the opportunity to be consistent, to show why you're being consistent, and to demonstrate that you're trying to comply with the best practice guidelines that in the network that you work in. By doing that, it will help you to build a relationship which is positive and which is rules based as well, which makes it harder for them to complain about what you will and won't do. Just to let you know, we will also be talking to, giving a very similar, almost identical presentation to all of our pharmaceutical partners. So all of the big global organizations, not necessarily the national ones, but to give the same presentation to them and try to explain why it's important for them. It is, of course, for their protection as much as yours. As I think Paulina said, people want to know that we as MS organizations are independent. They want to know where the information or the resources they're getting are coming from. And this helps to ensure that that's credited in the appropriate way. And the last thing I'd just like to say before I pass back to Victoria is just how important it is to always credit pharmaceutical support, because transparency is really important. And we will say the same message to them. Quite often we see pharmaceutical companies who don't want to put their name or logo on something because they don't want people to think it's coming from them. But it's really, really important that we always credit when that support comes, and it's always important that they do the same. And we will pass that message on tomorrow.
Brilliant. Thank you, Luke. Some really useful insights there. Now, I am just going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see a colourful screen. Luke, let me know because I can't see anything.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. So the traffic light guidelines are structured around 3 different scenarios. You've got on the left, the ideal situation to aim for. In the middle, the acceptable situation to aim for. And then on the right, you can see the situation really to try to avoid. Now, these are guidelines, but it's not us setting rules. So they are there for you to have flexibility and clarity, and to apply to your own contexts. So hopefully they will help you make the right decision for your own situations. But we don't want you to see these as us at MSIF dictating word for word exactly what you must do. See them more as a pragmatic set of guidelines to help you navigate those relationships. Okay, so if we look at the first scenario, which is the ideal situation to aim for. So this is when you acknowledge the pharmaceutical company or companies, if you're using multiple funders, by writing their name in plain text rather than using their logo. We'll show you a couple of real life examples of this in a moment, but first we'll just look at some of the wording that you might want to use. So this is all in the guidelines in the booklet, but to talk through some examples, you might say something like, we thank X and Y companies for their support, or this report was made possible by a grant from XYZ companies, or you might say something like this event was supported by funding from another company. And the reason that this is the ideal situation to aim for is because it allows you to demonstrate your independence from that company, as has been said before by Duna, Paulina, and Luke. So it shows very clearly to your audience that your company is your supporter or your funder rather than an equal partner that may potentially have editorial control over the content. And secondly, by using a company's logo, effectively that's free marketing and advertising for their brand, and really not our role as MS organizations. You may want to include as well a disclaimer on your material or video report that says something like acceptance of financial support from such and such company does not constitute endorsement by us of any of the company's products or services. So this again is making it really clear that you as the MS organization are completely independent from your funder, and that your information in no way is being shaped by financial interests of that pharmaceutical company. So if you're sitting there and thinking, okay, that sounds great, but in reality, that's going to be a really uncomfortable conversation to have, always remember that you can refer back to these guidelines in conversations with your funders. You can explain to them that you're looking to come to an agreement in line with what's been set out here in the guidelines, and just use the guidelines to back you up and bolster your request. And as Luke said a moment ago, we're holding another session tomorrow on the guidelines with many contacts from pharmaceutical companies to help them better understand the situation and the challenges from the perspective of an MS organization. So, we'll really be trying to make sure as far as possible that that those contacts are aware of the guidelines and what's in them. So use that to your advantage. All right, so Luke is now going to share a couple of examples of what the ideal situation can look like in practice.
Thanks, Victoria. So as you can see here, we wanted to show you how we've used these same guidelines, the exact principles in some of the work that we do. So the Atlas of MS was the latest version of it was published this year, but we applied these same rules back in the previous version in 2013. What we have in the digital version this year is as you can see with a green arrow at the top, we have just a simple standard section where we name the 8 or 9 different companies who co-supported the event. We don't use their logos, but we do acknowledge that it's important that we receive their support, because they've of course helped to make it possible. In the previous version in 2013, when we also published hard copies, paper copies of the atlas, we also used the same model, where towards the end of the document we just said a thank you to all of those who've supported it. It is, firstly, it's a legal requirement to do it. Sorry, you can move on, it's fine. It is a legal requirement. When you get funding from pharmaceutical companies, they are legally obliged to be acknowledged. That support is legally obliged to be acknowledged. They are not legally obliged to get their logo on it. So as you can see on the second slide here, where this is from the World MS Day website, where we simply list the companies who have helped co-support the event. So it's really good for our transparency. It's a legal obligation for the companies, and it's a really simple way just to say thank you, because they do help to make some parts of our work possible.
Great. Thank you very much, Luke. That was really useful. Okay, so next we're going to come to the acceptable situation to aim for. And this situation really reflects the fact that there are times when you might just need a little bit more flexibility. You might need to be a bit more agile in your response or in your approach. And it reflects the complexity and the range of scenarios that you might find yourself facing when negotiating with funders, that might just mean the ideal situation we've just discussed simply is not achievable. In practice, what does this look like? Well, the main difference between the ideal and the acceptable is that here it's when you might want to decide to use the company's logo when thanking them for their support. But even if you do decide to take this approach, remember that it's still up to you as the MS organization to decide and have the final say about where the company's logo goes in relation to yours, how large it is and prominent, and its placement on whatever it is that you're designing. So, as a guideline, we suggest that your logo is the most prominent. The company logo or logos, if there are multiple funders, are ideally much smaller, less prominent than your own. So as you can see in the example here on your screen, you've got, it's a webinar promotion banner or webinar banner. You've got the MS organization logo in the center here that's much larger. And then there's a line of text, which is quite small. So if it's not, I don't know if you can read it, but it says something like, with thanks to the following companies for their support of this webinar. And then you've got the smaller logos underneath, which are less dominant, less prominent when you see that banner. So this approach gives you the flexibility that you might need when navigating negotiations. It allows you to really take ownership of your work and say loud and clear, we produced this, we're the authors. And crucially, it reduces the risk of your audience having any misconception that the companies may have had influence over the information, the content in the webinar. And when taking this approach, make sure, well, firstly, that you're getting a written agreement with the company. And within that agreement, it's really good to make sure that the finer details that we've just discussed, like the logo size and prominence, positioning, are part of that early discussion. You might even want to design a few templates for how you envisage the logo sitting on the screen, on the page, um, uh, with the company's logo, and then you could always recycle and adapt that each time you work on a new agreement. But having something visual can really help to make sure that everyone understands, and if there are any issues, you can resolve that early on. Right, so we're now going to go over to Luke, who will talk us through a real life example for the acceptable situation in the guidelines.
Thanks, Victoria. So, so this example comes from our fantastic colleagues at MS Care in Egypt. And so this was actually, we wanted to share this one because they actually started demonstrating some of the good practices that we're talking about today in this acceptable area 3 years before we published the guidelines. And it just goes to show that actually, many of you are already trying to do this and trying to put these rules and these guidelines in place. And so really what we're trying to do is capture what's already being done and those best practices. So as you can see, this was a sponsored fundraising run which took place, a fantastic event which ran around the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And it was sponsored by two of, I'm sure you'll know both these big global pharmaceutical companies, Novartis and Roche. But as you can see on that top slide, the MS Care and World MS Day logos were the most prominent, and then they had the subject to underneath that were the sponsoring organizations logos. In an ideal world, and again, we didn't have these guidelines back then, there would be a line saying, sponsored by or supported by, whatever that kind of language might be. But it really goes to show, as you can see, in perhaps just in the picture at the bottom, that the logos of the actual organizing groups were actually much larger. But yeah, so thank you very much to MS Care Egypt for letting us use them as an example, and fantastic to see that we're able to build on what our members and other organizations are doing.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Luke. And yes, thank you, MS Care Egypt. And then we come on to last but not least, the third part of the guidelines, which is the situation really to try to avoid. And actually, this is made up of a few different examples, so we'll go through that now. The first is, if you can, really try to avoid sending joint invitations from your organization and a pharmaceutical company. You might know and be sure that the company has no influence over the content of the event, but there's a real risk that by sending out a joint invite in this way, it could be perceived as you and the company co-designing or collaborating rather than them simply being funders. So once again, this carries with it the risk of potential damage to your reputation. And with that, try to avoid using the company's logo on whatever it is you're producing, whether it's a video or a website, on its own without any accompanying text, because without that and without your logo, there's a risk that it can look like the company just led the project rather than supported it. And then actually the example that you can see on the screen here is where there are treatments on the page of this booklet. So avoid allowing pharmaceutical companies to promote their products or their services as part of your acknowledgement of their funding, or in fact, anywhere else in the material. And then finally, think about avoiding from the start, avoiding allowing the company to play any role in influencing the content or editing the information that you're providing. And it's vital that you're firm on this from the start so that everyone's clear that you are asking to have complete independence and control over the information you're providing. And then I will hand over to Luke, who will talk through an example for this.
So the example I wanted to raise today was an example from a regional affiliate of a global pharmaceutical company who actually got in touch with a number of different MS organizations in their region to encourage them to promote its webinar, which was itself unbranded. So you wouldn't ever know that this webinar had been organized by the company, and the patient organizations were encouraged to promote and encourage people to attend the webinar as if it was their own. Now, lots of companies like to do things. They like to co-create, they like to co-brand, they obviously want to do that because your brand gives them credibility. It builds, people trust your brand, they trust your organization, and by aligning themselves with you, they get the benefit of that. They may think that they're trying to kind of they may say or think that by removing the company logo from any communications, that what they're doing is keeping themselves out of the conversation and giving you the highlight. But if the content or the event is created by them, all they're doing is benefiting from your brand, but still getting their message out. So it's really important. We am very pleased to say that we were able to work with our members in the region and to contact the global head office of this company to alert them to what the regional affiliate was doing. They were, as you can imagine, horrified by this and immediately put a stop to it. So I'm very pleased that we were able to work with the members there. But yeah, it is something that we see quite frequently, and it's we even get asked it ourselves very, very often as MSIF to co-create or co-brand things, and it's really important in that now we have these traffic light guidance. Even for us, it's easy to use this now to point to it and say, well, this is not best practice. So please feel free to do the same.